So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Davina Limes. I'm the Managing Director at the E-Commerce Club, and I'm co-hosting this event today with Adele and the team over at the Fashion Network, or TFN as you might refer to them. We originally had planned to do this event as a physical event, and it was going to take place in London and Manchester earlier this year. But we felt that it would be a good idea to bring it online now, and we've got a guest panel with us today to answer your questions. I'll give you a little bit of kind of running order and sort of understanding as to how we're going to run things today. We've got sort of like the chat function, so if you've got sort of comments or things that you want to kind of sort of flag as we're going through, please do sort of like put them in there. You can also raise your hand if you've got a question to ask, and we will try and incorporate that as much as possible as we go along, but there will also be a little bit of time at the end as well for you to be able to ask some questions. And so I think sort of without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the panel to introduce themselves. They can tell you a little bit about themselves and a little bit about their role and where they kind of fit into the industry, so you get some context on that. So I'm going to hand over to Gavin first, if you can just say hello to everyone.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gavin Warwick. I am the Partnership Manager for SmartFreight. And SmartFreight is specifically a last mile TMS, which I suppose in layman's terms is that we are a multi-carrier shipping platform. We have 650 carriers available through the platform globally. SmartFreight is also a subsidiary of WiseTech Global, who are the world's leading provider of IT solutions to the logistics and supply chain industry. And we have offices in 59 countries around the world. I suppose specifically from a SmartFreight perspective, we provide a platform that integrates into your ERP, WMS, or e-com site. And the platform is personalized with your specific carriers, your rate cards, and you can set up business rules to automate which carrier any particular order should ship with. So you're taking the human out of the process to ensure you always ship in the optimal manner for your business. That's SmartFreight.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Gavin. Brad, could you let people know a little bit about yourself, please?
Certainly. Thank you very much. Very pleasure to be here. I and will bring hopefully a little bit more of a North American perspective, based in Montreal, working globally. I am in charge of helping the expansion of Heyday into the European markets, both Spain, France, and the UK. Heyday is a conversational AI platform. What that means, it's built for conversational commerce. It's built for social selling, using chat effectively on Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, etc., to engage an audience and to really try and sell. So we are super excited to be part of the e-commerce growth and the acceleration we've seen over the last few months, and are working with clients across Shopify Plus, as well as Magento and Salesforce Commerce Clouds typically. So happy to be here and provide some of our views and angles on e-commerce.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Brad. Lucy, could you let us know a little bit about yourself and an OMG Transact, which is a fairly new division, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks, Davina. Hi, everyone. Great to be here today. My name is Lucy Hawkes. I am Regional E-Commerce Director for OMG Transact. And as Davina said, OMG Transact is a relatively new business. It's part of Omnicom Media Group and is the e-commerce consultancy arm of the business. We're a network of international e-commerce specialists, and we specialize in Amazon, but also all other e-retailers across the globe, and supporting brands in their e-commerce journey, from retail to operations, and also media and digital performance as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lucy. And last but definitely not least, Marcus, it's your turn now.
Thanks. Glad of the definitely not least. Hi, everyone. Also very excited to be here. So thanks for having me, guys. I'm Marcus. I'm the Managing Director at ID. ID has been, for the last 27 years or so, one of the largest brand experience agencies in the UK. Broadly, we do three things: large-scale experiential activations across a number of different countries. The only turnkey pop-up retail activations agency in the UK. But really for the last 4 or 5 years, we've specialized in physical retail and how we can bring fantastic experiences into retail stores alongside a future fit commercial model for kind of 2020 and beyond. So we've recently relaunched that retail proposition called Agile Retail. And that's a result of us kind of running and operating a number of retail stores for some of our current retail partners, which has been really successful. So I'm going to spend a lot of time today talking about the role of physical retail, I think, in our future. And we certainly believe that physical retail stores have a really exciting, profitable and vibrant place in the omnichannel ecosystem in the future, particularly in fashion, actually, but only if that model is really, really challenged and disrupted over the next couple of years. So it'll be a really interesting discussion today, I'm sure.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marcus. And yes, I think, you know, where the physical store will fit is definitely going to be part of the discussion. So we just put up, we pre-identified some areas that we wanted to cover today. So here's some of the sort of things that we're going to be working through. You know, as I was saying, that as you're listening in, please do use the chat function. Please do raise your hand if you've got a question, and we will try and refer as much as possible sort of to your questions as we go along. And so I think now we've got a poll, haven't we, Dal? So we just wanted to understand. So if you can sort of vote on this, and this, you know, we've got a couple of polls sort of throughout the actual session today. Is we'd like to understand what percentage of sales do you think went online in the UK in August? So if you can just kind of tick one of these percentages now, and we should then sort of see this vote sort of come up live shortly, then we thought it'd be, you know, just useful to sort of get a view as to what you thought sort of the prevalence of e-commerce was in the UK in August. So if you can vote now, that would be great. Thank you very much. So, look, okay, so 60% of you think 68%. So interesting. Do we actually know what the stat is? I was going to say I don't actually know what the stat is. I think it's Marcus. Was it your company who wanted to put the poll?
Yes, it was. And congratulations, 5 of you, because the correct answer is 28%, and that's the highest. That number has been ever in the UK.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? So I'm actually thinking then, it's like, let's go into the first question, because looking at sort of how the retail model will continue to change. I wonder whether off the back of that, Marcus, we can start with you. That's actually surprisingly low. I think obviously a lot of people thought it was going to be much higher, where, you know, people have shifted to a sort of more e-commerce kind of led model in recent months.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we certainly suspected that poll might sort of come out with those sorts of numbers, I think. And I think it's a really interesting question to kind of follow up with as to why that is. There's certainly a lot more media attention around the growth of online. There's undeniably been a huge amount of growth online, and that's only going to continue. If we run that poll again and said, well, what was the number in February? I think the number would have been closer to 20%. So, you know, in transitional terms, it's actually, although the pure number is still relatively low, it's actually a fairly extreme jump over a relatively short period of time forward for online transactions for some obvious reasons. I think as you kind of play that out into that specific question around how does the retail model continue to change, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, that pace of change is only going to continue to accelerate, and I think in the short to medium term, clearly transacting in retail is only going to become more and more online and more automated. And I won't steal some kind of Brad's thunder, but some of the areas that he particularly works in and can share some insights for are undoubtedly the future of transactional retail. I think what's really interesting is we can't ignore the 78% right now that still kind of goes physically through a shop. And actually there's a real kind of revolution, I think, starting to take place in how physical retail stores reinvent themselves and understand what their role is in that highly digitized world. and it's much more centered around becoming more of a brand, media, and engagement exercise. I think stores exist more for spaces to allow customers to come and discover products that you can then go and buy online, you know, the kind of made.com sort of model, or somewhere where you can get a bit of affinity and a bit of an experience to kind of emotionally connect with that brand. Or you might have a particularly complicated product that needs a little bit of demonstration and discussion. So I think we're increasingly starting to see the model of retail change and kind of split between a highly transactional, online, really simple, automated purchase assist model and an experience-led retailtainment kind of role for physical stores with a completely different set of appraisal behind it.
And is this like a kind of natural progression, or do you think things have been sped up and this was the way we were going anyway, or do you think that anything's fundamentally changed with the, you know, effects of the pandemic?
I think it'd be naive for anyone to say that the pandemic hasn't sped stuff up. I think generationally the pandemic has helped a kind of cluster of society who wouldn't naturally have entertained digital shopping to suddenly have to start doing so and realize it's kind of not the end of the world and become maybe late stage adopters. I think that the trajectory that was already happening, however, is the kind of millennials, Gen Zs and below, who start becoming the dominant purchasing force in the near future, have never been so product oriented anyway. You know, there's lots of research out there now around, you know, 72% of millennials will spend more money on an experience than they will for a product. 82% of Gen Z say kind of where a brand comes from in terms of its sustainability credentials is way more important. Again, all this sort of stuff that we'll touch on in the future. But the role of kind of an experience and a brand connection for that generation of consumers has always been a much more strong advocacy point than it has been for previous generations. So I think we were on that journey anyway.
Excellent, excellent. Brad, I'm going to come to you next, and because I want to get everyone's view on this, which is, you know, where do you kind of see this sort of retail model going? What do you think it's going to look like?
I mean, I think that it's, I can support Marcus's ideas there, and I'll try and give again, a North American example if I can. I think could be relevant. But just in terms of the change, you know, this acceleration is undeniable. We see it in our own business, our own data. We see it like as what flows through our platform. But more specifically, you know, with the store closures, the potential for Main Street or High Street, you know, going through another wave, you know, there has been a massive, more, let's say, interest in finding new ways to engage. And I think that this idea of engagement, whether it's via chat or whether it's via video or whether it's via, you know, new pop-up stores or, you know, maybe a personalized VIP event or anything that still creates a connection, creates a brand resonance. I think that it's really important. At Heyday, we use chat to continue to do that so that I can still talk through WhatsApp, or I can still answer questions, or I can deliver a brand promise. But, you know, there still is a role for a store, and a store very executionally can be a click and collect. It can be a, you know, buy online, pick up in store, book an appointment so that, you know, you feel safe picking up your package if you want to do that. And it goes all the way to what Marcus was saying around, you know, really more of a showrooming type of, you know, brand, you know, experience. And the best thing I can use is, and hopefully, you know, everyone is familiar with like a Canada Goose and the big parkas that people use these days in North America and Europe and Asia, which is a really trendy brand. Well, they've taken actually, and they've launched new stores that don't even have any product inside. They just have a cold room where you literally put on parkas and test them in a -20, -30 room. And then you basically use some QR codes and, you know, use some emails or use some other form of, you know, digital kind of follow-up to then maybe go buy online. So, you know, there's a lot of interesting things that are happening, and, you know, it's only going to be, you know, more innovative, more experimentation. I think it's great opportunity. I mean, you know, it just has to test, and we'll figure out what, you know, your demographic, your target market wants.
And we've got a questions coming from Lex, who's listening in. If we go down this kind of showrooming type route, will it possibly be multiple brands within sort of like a single sort of showroom, sort of experiential type environment? Or do you think it will become sort of individualized to the brand, and the brand will want to own that experience in their own right?
Listen, I'm going to go with, I mean, bad answer, but it depends. Like if I look at some of our retail, the luxury clients, luxury client already has 3, 4, 5, sometimes 12 brands. So they're now using a warehouse that used to just have stock, and they've turned it into a showroom to do video chat and to do video appointments and to do styling. Well, you know what? There's 12 different brands inside that showroom. So it really depends if you are a multi-brand or you're a single brand. Obviously, you're a single brand, you still have to, you can still do it. There's an opportunity if you still have your store associates or your merchandisers or your stylists can be inside a single location and can turn that location into more of a VIP video chat kind of experience. So showrooming is comes in a couple different ways, but at the end of the day, it's still brand connection to individual, and I think that is still what was the most important.
Lucy, I'm going to come to you next. So, thinking about this retail model, do you think, what do you see kind of sort of winning out? Where do you think sort of things are going to move to?
To be honest, in the future, I think when we finally emerge out of the COVID-19 situation, I think lots of people will be seeking going back into stores and actually having a sense of normality in their lives. So although I agree with the showrooming piece, and I definitely think brands will be switching more to an experiential sort of environment and experience for consumers, but at the same time, I think you'll simultaneously have a resurgence in people wanting to go to stores and have that face-to-face time contact with people. And I think it will be really interesting as well to see the innovation that brands implement over the next 18 months, 2 years, in terms of how they are being, they're going to have to cut through all of the competition, because more and more people will be looking for these experiences, this change in the dynamic of shopping. They'll want more and more. And as we've seen consumers be more demanding in terms of delivery times and things like that, I think we'll also see consumers wanting more and more exciting experiences in terms of this showrooming piece, but then also wanting the same thing online. So you'll end up with lots of people who are shopping online, but you'll also have people who want to go back into store as part of the social aspect too.
Excellent. Gavin, I know we've covered sort of lots of different ideas here, but do you have sort of like any different perspective on this, or do you kind of concur that this is, really how sort of retail will be in the future?
Yeah, I suppose from my own personal perspective, I don't have the retailing experience I suppose that the others might have. So as a layman, I look at my own high street and see how that changes. But I think, interestingly, the poll at the start of people looking at the top figure in terms of what was e-commerce, when actually in reality it's the 28%. I think the reasons for that perhaps are because when we're looking at online, people aren't in a shop to bring their goods home with them. So therefore the retailer has to engage with other parties, i.e. warehousing, 3PLs, distribution companies. And obviously those sorts of businesses don't have spare capacity sitting in the background just on the off chance that something like COVID happens. And obviously come in February, there was a big choke point, obviously, because all of a sudden it was a flick of a switch and stores closed, and the only way to get something was to actually go online and purchase it. So I think that's very interesting. I think it's been commented, that e-commerce has moved on 5 years in the space of 5 months, and certainly from I think a volume perspective, that's probably true. Transactions have jumped up massively. I think it's put some considerable pressure on all the supporting industries, and it's going to be very interesting how that plays out over time. And certainly carriers, warehousing have all made big investment in terms of people, but people aren't necessarily going to be the long-term answer here. It's going to be system-driven, and I think both carriers and warehouse operations, we're progressively becoming smarter, more robotic, and that's going to accelerate if the current e-commerce numbers stick.
It sounds like everyone thinks that bricks and mortar will continue to be part of the mix. I'm going to come back to you, Marcus, for two reasons. One, I want to kind of sort of get your view as to how big a part of the mix it will be, and also I wonder whether you know where the source is for the 28%, because Anthony was asking.
I've seen the question. So it's the ONS, Office of National Statistics sources. I'll send you the link if you don't believe me. I feel like people don't believe it, so.
We can send it around afterwards, perhaps, when we do a kind of thank you follow-up with the recording. So do you think it's going to be like the kind of, in terms of the sort of omni-channel mix, you know, will it be that sort of e-commerce continues to grow and that sort of bricks and mortar becomes a slightly sort of smaller part of the pie, or it sounds like potentially that could be it?
I think there are probably two kind of connected answers to that question, really. I think to a certain extent it depends on what you call the pie, and I think in pure pounds and pence terms, yes, probably the chances are that e-commerce will continue to grow in that kind of share of wallet, and physical stores will kind of decline. And as I think some of the guys said already, we've already sort of seen that manifest itself over the last kind of year or so. I think the kind of other way of looking at physical retail stores, though, is kind of almost go back to that 28% to a certain extent. I think there very clearly is an absolutely vital and massively important role for physical bricks and mortar stores within the omnichannel mix in the future. And I think that really is currently massively underappreciated. If you put yourselves in the position of if you are an online brand at the moment, for example, almost 70% of the buying population out there you're not touching if you don't have a kind of physical presence in some way, shape or form. You can't replicate that kind of experience and generate that brand affinity that we've all talked about without stores to a certain extent. So I kind of feel quite strongly that the future is really bright for physical retail, but with a massive caveat that not with the model in the way that it currently is. I'd kind of argue that we're not seeing physical retailers failing at the moment because there's no space for physical retail within the future ecosystem. I think the model is really antiquated, really expensive, really complicated. We don't make it easy, certainly in the UK, but also on the international stage to a certain extent, to kind of run physical retail stores. I think there's a kind of KPMG stat out there that if you want to enter into the UK, it generally costs you about £250,000 to even think about it in terms of opening a physical store. And retail, businesses need to be able to be much more agile than that if we want to trade retail stores. The locations that are the right places to have stores are kind of all thrown up in the air, and there needs to be a more test and learn approach to that. The kind of leasing structure around 15, 25-year commitments on spaces kind of needs to be ripped up and thrown out of the window. I think to the point that Lucy was talking about earlier on in terms of what that in-store experience looks like, the kind of talent you need working in stores, engaging with customers, is probably completely different to what you might have wanted from a store associate a few years ago. So I think there's a real kind of big challenge out there for, if you're currently a retailer that doesn't have a physical presence, you are missing something. If you are a retailer with an incumbent physical presence, you need to be really brave and kind of shred the existing operating model and say, what's a different, new, agile way of running physical stores for that success to really come through.
Brad, I'm going to bring you in here, thinking about that omni-channel mix, because I'm thinking about your expertise. Have you seen sort of like much of a shift here, and do you think that will sort of continue?
Again, from a different perspective on this side of the pond, as we say, I mean, I think that we have way too many stores. I mean, I just think because we have physical space and sprawling retail footprints and malls and strip malls and everything else, you do not need the number of stores that we have today. A lot of the brands and a lot of our customers, a lot of our clients are shuttering some of their brands. I mean, a lot of them haven't paid rent 6, 7, 8 months, and they're looking to continue to recoup some of these savings. So, I mean, I think that again, I firmly believe that there is a future for bricks and mortar, to really become part of that omni-channel clicks and bricks type of movement. Again, it has to be fully reinvented, as the caveats have been pointed out, and even more so, we deal a lot in Shopify Plus, to be very upfront. So we deal in a lot of D2C, which doesn't need a retail footprint. Now, that's funny because there are some companies, maybe the Gymsharks of the world or others, that are starting to open small little boutiques or smaller kind of shops. So you see a D2C movement into physical retail itself. And that's, interesting. So it shows that the power of retail, the power of the store, the power of the connection, the power of the showroom, if you will. So, I mean, it's needed. The greatest thing is that with the technology that's out there today, and whether it be an e-commerce platform, or whether it be even your shipping platform and your packaging, your shipment tracking, your chat, your whatever it is, you can still weave all of it together. It's just a matter of finding, I think, the right partner, understanding the strategy, what's right for your business. And that just, that takes a little bit more thinking. But I mean, you have an opportunity to use technology to weave your e-commerce and your bricks and mortar seamlessly.
Excellent. Lucy, I'm going to bring you in here because I wanted to get your view on sort of bricks and mortar. And I think you also mentioned to me a little bit about subscription model as well, and how that maybe becomes more important in the omnichannel mix. And then I want to kind of lead into the next question as well, because I know this is your area of expertise, which is also looking at, that sort of consumer, sort of that customer journey, and sort of like whether that will change or has changed. And so I thought that kind of gives us a kind of nice lead into thinking about it from the sort of customer perspective, as well as the actual sort of mix of how things will sort of look in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I was just listening to Marcus and Brad, and it kind of, I completely agree with their points of view, but at the same time, I'm speaking about this from quite an Amazon perspective, I suppose, just from working there. They sort of drum it into you. It's all about the consumer at the end of the day and what they want. And I think in order to be successful, whether that be in bricks and mortar retailers or omni-channel or pure e-commerce retailers, that we have to strip it back and look at, okay, how is the consumer shopping right now? How did they shop before? And how can we make sure that in the future, we're doing the right thing for the consumer? So it's not just about, stripping it out and thinking what would be the best opportunity for them. And that's where subscription models come into play as well, where over the last few months, lots of people have, enrolled in subscriptions, not necessarily in traditional sort of CPG items or subscribe and save opportunities on Amazon, but also flower subscriptions or, restaurant delivery subscriptions as well. So I think, there's lots of change and innovation coming in, and will continue to come in over the next 12 months as people take this as an opportunity to basically take a back seat and look into their business and think, okay, how do we use the current situation and what's happened to us to really understand the consumer dynamic a bit more. And if you look as well at Ocado, that's a good example where in the face of the pandemic, they fell over in terms of their operation and went offline because they couldn't deal with the amount of demand online. And lots of people were forced to go into bricks and mortar, superstores to get their groceries. And from that perspective, you do need them there because they do fulfill a consumer need. So I think the future is very bright for both bricks and mortar and omnichannel too.
And how do you think this kind of leads into that sort of consumer sort of, that customer journey? Do you think that that's going to change sort of like, significantly, or what's your view on that?
I think the concept of researching online and purchasing offline will remain the same, but it will take a while to get back to that because obviously people are reluctant to go in store at the moment. But then, from the perspective of targeting consumers, people are going online and looking they're in the evaluation and exploration phase of their purchasing journey. So I think that will continue where people are going online and they're using search. I mean, search is the future, and that is how people are shopping right now. There are these infinite aisles online, whereas in a supermarket you just have one aisle, you go down, you get whichever item it is. Whereas now there's so much choice available to consumers, and it's making sure again that you have that cut through, and therefore looking at shoppable media and e-commerce media opportunities. Amazon obviously spearheaded that a few years ago with their AMS and AMG opportunities, as it was called back then. But I think more and more e-retailers are beginning to see that they need to ramp up in terms of that side of their business, so the media side, to really make sure that they're pulling in the consumers. And that's what consumers want as well. They want to understand more about the brand in what is a very cluttered and can be quite chaotic environment, because there's so many products available now in the online space. It's not like in a supermarket where you have the sort of end of aisle media opportunities. There's lots going on online, and in order to cut through, you need search banners, sponsored search, and also brand stores online too.
Excellent. And Marcus, I'm going to come over to you now, because I think sort of your background plays into this, but also Lex was also asking about the subscription model and whether it could potentially work in the fashion industry. I don't know if you've got a view on that. And Josie was asking back again to the sort of the stat, the 28%, as whether that included sort of food retail. So a couple of kind of things for you to sort of look after there.
Sure. I probably should have said at the beginning, my background before this actually was to run e-commerce food operations for Sainsbury's, which I did for kind of 5 years. So food and online is particularly interesting. I should declare an interest here that whenever people talk about online fulfillment being quite tough, it's generally about product that doesn't go out of date within about 16 hours. So I always have a healthy skepticism about anyone's view that it's hard to shift product, because 16 hours is hard to shift product. So I guess an answer to that specific question around kind of online participation, no, it's pretty much neck and neck. I mean, it kind of always has been that case. I think fashion is kind of 12% of that online makeup, and food's another 12%. I think the devil's in the detail though, because that does sort of ignore the kind of the elephant in the room with fashion in particular around returns. And when you start putting that into the equation, it actually does become much more difficult in the fashion landscape from an online perspective than it does for physical retail. I think it's a really interesting question about the subscription model in terms of fashion. I think there've been some really interesting early step moves from some really good brands in that space. So things like Rent the Runway, for example, which I think was a kind of American began, that kind of concept of having an almost subscription-based model. Thread do something similar over in the UK, which is a kind of a tailored fashion mix and match kind of subscription model where you can then try on and send back what you don't want, or you can kind of share products and share clothing between people. I think it's got a really interesting future, absolutely. It's interesting, I think we probably see more of our work in the physical retail space is the mirror image of what Lucy was just describing. Actually, we see much more value in the kind of browsing offline, buying online space. And that I think could be really interesting and really powerful if fashion brands can land that correctly. If an offline experience can really get customers to understand, particularly in the fashion space, what sort of fit works for them, what sorts of colors work for them, what sort of textiles work for them. And as a result of that, that leads to a really sticky subscription model or an online purchase that kind of removes a lot of the returns burden. That for me is a kind of really specific example of where an omnichannel ecosystem could work really, really well. The key behind it is you have to then appraise that. You have to understand the value of that subscription model to the process and that physical interaction of kind of cutting out returns and getting a stickier customer. So it's a really kind of complex challenge for fashion brands to get their head around, I think. There are so many opportunities to make a real success of that mixed channel opportunity.
Excellent. Gavin, I'm going to bring you in. I know we've got sort of a whole section that's your sort of expertise shortly, but I didn't know if you had anything to add in terms of, the subscription model and returns, and whether there's been any kind of sort of massive, I don't want to run down the returns rabbit hole, but has there been like a sort of massive sort of effect over recent months during the pandemic?
Yeah, like two things have been touched on there, which I think are close to my heart, and one is actually food as well. I think there's a massive opportunity there coming up, and some real disruptive behavior on the horizon in that space. Returns, yeah, like with fashion returns, like I think the figure quoted is sort of generally as 25-30%. Maybe Marcus can nod or to that. Yeah, it's of that order. I mean, that's a staggering figure, and I think that has to be looked at. How you actually go about it, I don't know. It's all built into the purchasing model, I suppose, from the outset. But from a sustainability perspective, like it just doesn't add up. There's lots of challenges as well in terms of bringing those returns back. It's not just a case of putting them back on the shelf, because look, they have to be tested, have to be worn. There's lots of process to go through. So actually, the costs associated with returns isn't just the carriage of them back. It's also the additional costs in the warehouse of processing to determine, are they fit to go back into stock? Are they disposal? Yeah, and like the more transactions, particularly in fashion, that go outbound, look, it's the more comes back. And I see it in my own house here. People buy things, and a certain proportion tends to go back again.
I thought you were sitting in the warehouse there.
As I explained earlier, that's what people can't see what's behind me.
Exactly. So Lucy, I think you were mentioning a little bit there about sort of age groups and the sort of demographics of how people are behaving online. Again, sort of, how do you think that will sort of develop in the future? Do you think that it's going to become the sort of like, the prevail of a younger age group, or do you think we'll actually educate my parents how to buy online too?
I think it's a mix. I think it will continue to be generally that a younger generation are more sort of comfortable using e-commerce and being online in general. But then at the same time, I think lots of older people have also really taken this as an opportunity to educate themselves in how to order things online. And using my grandma as an example, she didn't have a clue before this all started, and now she's getting quite proficient in ordering things, using WhatsApp, doing lots of things she didn't do before, which is fantastic. And I think we'll continue to see that over the next again 12 to 18 months. And I think as well, retailers and brands will have to be cognizant of that and make sure that they're appealing to a wider consumer. They're not just targeting older people in stores and younger people online. They're actually creating harmony between their online and offline channels to make sure that they're targeting all consumers, especially in the case of brands which do have a wide demographic, that they're making it really relevant for them and not sort of being outdated in their approach.
Brad, do you have a view on this at all about the age group demographics?
Definitely.
You always have an opinion.
In chat, I mean, I think what Lucy's saying is paramount. There's been, there's these new habits have been created. These new experiments have happened, and people have changed and will change, and they'll continue going forward with these new things that they found that make their lives more efficient. Whether you be 80 or whether you be 18, the biggest thing that we find is in a world of always on immediate gratification, depending on your client as you go after a certain demographic, using chat specifically to kind of connect with individuals on their time where they want, on their channel. Being omnichannel is being everywhere and being able to kind of turn that on. I mean, you definitely see this type of tendency to this technology with these different target markets, and some are obviously much more able and interested in others. And I mean, you could even go so far as one client we have, the 16 to 24-year-old let's call it skateboard apparel manufacturer. They don't even use email. I mean, you can't market to them via email. You can only market to them via WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger because they don't even have an email. So again, it's just the way. I mean, that's leading edge case because of the age group. But I mean, these are different times, and again, the experiments.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about sort of, the particular theme at the moment is thinking about sustainable production. I know, Lucy, I wanted to kind of come back to you on this one briefly, is that, do you think that that's going to become sort of like a big focus for people, the sustainability angle?
Yeah, definitely. I think 2019, we really saw a shift in focus to sustainability and, plastic and how it's destroying the world. Basically, that was the message that was got across in media. And I think lots of brands have jumped on that and made changes to their packaging, to their supply chains to really try and strip that out. And that's not just applicable to the grocers. There's also, if we look at Diageo, for example, they're introducing a new paper spirits bottle for Johnny Walker. And then you've got Loop as well, who have recently entered that space, and they're reinventing how consumers think about packaging and how they think about the retail environment in general, because their concept is to, you know, to rent the packaging and refill it. So you don't actually own your Heinz bottle of tomato ketchup. You just rent it and then go and refill it. And I think, you know, as well, going back to the point about how will the future of retail look, that's something as well to be aware of, that big supermarkets may not necessarily be housing lots of plastic bottles and glass bottles on their shelves. They'll be there as well for people to go and refill their vessels, basically.
So I can just imagine the mess in Tesco of my daughter trying to refill her Heinz ketchup bottle. I do not recommend it. So, Gavin, I'm going to come over to you now, because we wanted to look at harmonising your sort of retail supply chain. I know we have a poll here that we want to stick up. So I think, lovely Dale, you're in the background, sort of like in charge of our polls. So I'll give you a moment to kind of pop that up, and perhaps, Gavin, you can kind of think about you know, your sort of answer to this question. So we wanted to get an understanding is, you know, as a retailer, do you envisage needing to have multiple carriers in the future for your e-commerce business? So most sort of people who at the moment will tend to have a single carrier. They might have sort of a different service for sort of next day delivery, or sort of, you know, a quicker delivery. But do you think actually sort of most retail businesses go down the route of needing a multiple carrier? Or they're going to stick with one carrier, or you're not too sure? So if you can sort of vote now, that would be great, and we should see those results come up on the screen, and that should give you a little bit of fodder to chat about, Gavin.
Sure.
So I'll hand over to you now, Gavin, anyway, and then we should see that sort of pop up as people sort of complete voting.
Yeah, like I think, obviously, as I said earlier, there's a huge challenge in the logistics sector in support of the move to online. And I suppose we've got two things happening at the same time. We've got the COVID experience, and also the elephant in the room, which still hasn't got a resolution, is Brexit. And both of those have put a lot of pressure on warehousing space. Not just space, but space of the right type in the right location. And obviously then the surge in demand in e-commerce has put pressure on not just warehousing, but also the carriers as well. And I think, looking back a number of years ago, we as a sector in logistics got caught out. And I think it was caught, not just logistics themselves got caught out, but also retailers and the communication between the two, in that Black Friday was a growing event, and I think it must have been about 7 years ago, it just mushroomed, and you know, retailers weren't able to cope with the orders, their warehouses weren't able to fulfill them, carriers weren't able to deliver. And I think, you know, we've all learned a lot from that, that experience, and that's seen, I suppose, those conversations grow and mature, and better planning's put in place. Looking at the results here, I would expect to see e-tailers look to increase the number of carriers that they would have on their books. Obviously, it depends upon the type of business that you are, how many orders you send out, of course. I mean, do you want to water down your buying power with your carrier, for example? But certainly, in terms of the consumer, you know, consumers, I think it's been shown that consumers are more likely to purchase when they have better options available to them to receive delivery. And that will be things like, you know, parcel shops, lockers, next day delivery, time definite deliveries increasing, same day delivery. And I think, I would presume anyway, that a lot of retailers will have one eye on the current environment. They may have got some issues over the last few months with capacity in the carrier that they're using, possibly. I think this peak is going to be an unprecedented peak like no other. And certainly I'd be very surprised if a lot of retailers aren't building in as much resilience to their supply chains as they can possibly do, because, you know, not only will we have our normal peak, but we're likely to have the additional pressure of COVID as well.
It was quite high though, 63% of people sort of thinking that, you know, they'd need more than one carrier.
Yes, but I mean, some carrier, I mean, if you're a business in the UK, you might have both a domestic audience and an international audience. So it may be almost from the get-go you've got 2 carriers on your books, or you might be shipping out both parcels and pallets. So again, automatically you will have a number of carriers on your books. And if you're using a carrier that is experiencing some capacity issues, you may well want to supplement that with another carrier of a similar sort. So look, you all of a sudden are juggling all these balls with different carriers and trying to manage your decision making as to why do I use carrier A as opposed to carrier B. And like, so people, retailers, they're looking at their different options and they're trying to manage those options. And to do that, I think one of the big things is how you manage your systems and integrate your systems as part of that overall process of to deliver. And that's from your ERP, your e-commerce platform, through your warehouse management system, to the likes of the system that we provide, transport management system, is to help that decision making, is to make it slick, take out the human intervention. The last thing you want to be doing as a business is rekeying in data from one system to another. And you'd still be surprised at the number of businesses and the size of those businesses as well, with the number of transactions that they're keying information from one platform to another. And that's just creating a choke point, as well as building an error to your systems.
Massive bottleneck. So just quickly on this, because I know this is going to be a kind of bit of a guess, but when do you think the last order date will be for Christmas?
How long does this string? I think it will depend by carrier, and obviously where you're delivering to. Obviously the carriers will be under pressure. I'm sure that date will be pulled back. I don't have a feel for it.
For a delivery in London, when's the last date I'll be able to order presents for my kids?
I would play it safe and go and check it from a retail store yourself. I wouldn't leave it to the last minute.
So none of that I'll order on sort of like Christmas Eve.
I think you may forget about that this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, there could be some very disappointed children.
Yeah, exactly. So we've actually got a question. I'm gonna throw this out to sort of like, whoever wants to kind of sort of pick this one up. But we've had a question from Olivia, and she was asking the best way to start a retail business in 2020, which I thought was actually a really good question. If you're about to sort of launch now, what should you be doing and what should your model look like? Who wants to take this?
It's a bit of a big lob ball. It's a meatball, as we say, in terms of trying to answer. I think that first of all, you have to look at a number of things. Again, we work with very small solo entrepreneurs, so solopreneurs. That one person, running an e-commerce shop, to very large multinationals. On the smaller side, if you're starting something out, I think it really depends on, what you're selling. Does someone need a feel? Does someone need a touch? Do you really want to take on a lease right now? Is that something, you can do a pop-up, that's fine. So that's something that's an alternative. And I think it's really more about choosing an e-commerce platform and just going all in, all online for at least the beginning, that is going to be able to grow with you and is going to be able to help you. If you're technical, then great. You can do something a little bit more funky. If you're not, then you need the Wix, or you need the Shopify, or you need something to start, before you can get to, and get take the training wheels off. Do you have monies to, pay developers and to help support you as well? So these things are not what you always think about when you're starting a store. When you think about selling something online and opening up a shop with an idea, like the logistics, the technology in the back end, they can really come up really quickly. So it's something to think about in terms of capacity for resources.
And
I'd probably, if I could jump in really quickly on that one, I think it might be useful to share a kind of practical example. So we did this with a kind of retail partner brand of ours about 7-8 months ago, and kind of went through everything Brad just described to a certain extent. Actually, Canadian-owned business, opening in the UK for the first time. We led digitally and kind of went through everything you've just described, Brad. We've ended up in the COVID world in a very localized physical setting. For about 4 months now, actually, we've traded physically in somewhere that would not be on anyone's destination map a few months ago, in a little suburb area, a localized high street in West London, not a kind of really big destination area. And we outperform physically at this precise moment in time to the tune of about £8 to 1. For every £8 we do in store, we do £1 online. And it really is because of everything Brad's just described. I think the online piece is really difficult to break through into. I think Lucy kind of touched on that too. The kind of, the level of competition out there is really, really tough, and there's a lot of complexity around it that people kind of misunderstand. And I think right now, if you're on someone's kind of residential high street in the kind of current COVID era, that's not necessarily a bad place to be commercially. People aren't traveling as much as they wanted to. It's a great marketing window for us to be in that space. We don't expect that to be the same in 6 months' time. We expect to be much more kind of online led again, and we expect the cycle to kind of repeat itself a little bit. But if I was Olivier thinking about what I needed to do now, I'd kind of question the shift right at this precise moment in time and think about it differently.
No worries. So I'm going to come to you now, Lucy, and I believe we also have a slide as well, which is that how do you think people should be sort of preparing for the future?
Great, thanks, Davina. Yeah, so basically, I mean, the slide hasn't come up yet.
Ah. There you are. Oh.
Thank you, that's great. So this just helps me frame it basically, but how we see it is we need to look at the e-commerce through the lens of the shelf. So in terms of the future, looking at the shelf from behind the shelf, at the shelf, to the shelf, and beyond the shelf, to really break down the different areas where the consumer interacts with the product online. So if we look at behind the shelf, for example, this is where we'd audit things like retail health of the business, such as profitability and operations. And then if we look at the shelf, that would be how the product is appearing to the consumer in terms of the digital appearance and availability. So is it tangible? Are the product title and descriptions and images all reflecting the product in the best possible way? And then you've got to the shelf, which focuses on the consumer journey within the e-retailer and unpicks how they are interacting with the products online. And then we can use this to understand the consumer again and maximize the opportunities within the e-retail environment more generally. And then finally, if we look at beyond the shelf, this goes beyond the realms of the retailer and looks at programmatic media opportunities as well. So driving consumers in the online ecosystem, not necessarily within a retailer, but they might be, I don't know, reading the news or something like that, and they're driven into a retailer to purchase. So I think, in the future, having a model like that and breaking it down to streamline it will make it much easier to future-proof your business. Because it can be quite overwhelming to think of all the different, facets that come with working in the online space.
Excellent, thank you, Lucy. Now I'm going to hop over to you quickly, Gavin, because I know that you've got to go in a couple of minutes. So I'm going to just get you to give us your view on this kind of sort of final closing question, which is, if we're gazing further into the future, what do you think it's going to look like in kind of 2030, or as we sort of get towards sort of 2030?
Yeah, well, look, first off, you'll be pleased to hear that I don't have to escape actually in a couple of minutes, so I'm actually all right. I think systems, and as I was alluding to earlier, and their connectivity is absolutely critical. I think there's some big sort of back office things happening in supply chain. I think automation, robotics are going to play a big role in warehouses and really slicking things there. But I suppose the thing I was really looking at, and it was touched on earlier, is food, and I did allude to it, and I think Marcus obviously has an interest in this space as well. Look, I think food retail for me is going to be potentially a game changer going forward. Will the supermarket shop that we do every week, is it going to exist in the not too distant future? It might be a thing of the past. And will we see things like the automated repurchase and delivery based upon consumption or buying patterns? I think that the potential prize to moving to this sort of purchasing in the e-commerce space is going to be massive. And I have a figure here, it's a couple of years old, and I hope I've got it right now. But if every household in Europe was to place just one grocery order per week, it would actually double the size of the e-commerce market in Europe. So that's a staggering statistic, and how you actually would go about fulfilling that is another question. But when you see online orders being fulfilled on the floor of the supermarket today, you just know that's inefficient. So something has to change. And we mentioned Ocado earlier, and obviously they're making some moves in this space, but also Amazon. I mean, Amazon are obviously putting themselves in place to provide some sort of disruption in the not too distant future as well. So I think the grocery space is going to be a very interesting one for the next few years.
I think it is, you're right. So Brad, I'm going to come over to you. You've got a kind of minute to give your answer.
Ooh. So next
How do you condense it in?
You've just used up 30 seconds.
Pass. No, I just think, I mean, future 5 to 10 years, I mean, that's kind of, I think, where we're kind of wrapping a little bit of this up. I think again, it's all about, and kind of shameless plug, empathy and you know, brand connection. So I think that you still need to, you know, find new ways to connect with the audience. We may be those distanced. You may have the smaller retail footprint. You maybe not. Maybe you reinvent yourself. Again, it's just still really being able to have a conversation, to be able to connect and to engage, to be able to do all these sort of things that is going to give you, you know, the ability to stay connected and stay relevant to your audience. So very empathetic in these times, especially in the next 18 to 24 months. I think will prove, you know, will prove to be a great investment for the brands of the future.
I'll add to the sort of shameless plug there, because we've got the next webinar that we're doing actually with you, Brad, is on November the 5th, and that's on Humanizing E-Commerce, where we're actually going to look at how do you sort of bring that kind of sort of more sort of connection with the brand, that sort of human interaction into an e-commerce business, where those touch points are going to be online rather than sort of physical. So if anyone wants to sign up for that, then that's on November the 5th. So I'm going to come over to you next, Lucy. What do you think the landscape, the retail landscape, is going to look like in sort of, you know, 10 years' time?
I think it will be more shifted to online purchasing, obviously. But I'd say as well, it's a key opportunity for brands over the next 5 to 10 years to really think about targeting the audience in different phases of the purchasing funnel. So I would say driving awareness, driving consideration, so targeting those that are engaged, that are not engaged with the category, targeting those researching the category, and then driving through to purchase, so targeting those researching the brand, and then targeting past purchases. And that is the way that people, I think, can be successful online. So making sure that you're engaging with the consumer as we move to this online centric space. And making sure you have that dynamic and that relationship with the consumer that can be lost in some cases through the online medium.
Excellent, excellent. And then last but not least, again, Marcus.
Not least again.
Yes.
I think people like us on panels like this, we very often get the debate wrong. I think we still fall into the trap of talking about this sort of future omni-channel world as if it's not already here. I think we're kind of already in a post-digital world to a certain extent. We're 5 years behind the debate, actually, quite a lot of the time when we talk about stuff like this. I think if you kind of flash forward to a high street in 5 to 10 years' time, I think the future of retail looks like almost exclusively digital for transacting. I'd be as bold as to say that. And much more of a societal activity to experience in the real world. And I think the very nature of retail and retail stores as we see it won't look anything like it does today. I think the operating model will be completely different, much more agile, much more outsourced, much more of an appraisal of retail as a service and retail stores as a marketing activity. And we'll have just automated the vast majority of our purchasing decisions that will be fulfilled predominantly online. And that's a really exciting space for both of those. But I think brands that succeed will kind of really sort out the convenience element of their online offer with all the things that the rest of the guys on this webinar are really focused on and doing great stuff in, and also kind of recognize the kind of marketing and societal value of their physical estates and structure that in a much more commercially sensible way than we probably have it today.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So That was a very interesting discussion. I think you're right. I think sometimes we're we're talking about sort of, you know, where we already are, or where we all, you know, lots of people are already trying to sort of strive to be. So I'd like to say thank you for all of you for taking part today. We'll obviously do some follow up with the audience and so on. So if there's any content, some of the references and so on there, then you know, we can actually sort of share those. But we'd also like to thank you and your respective sort of businesses for supporting today's webinar. So Smart Freight, OMG Transact, Heyday, and the ID agency. And hopefully we will see you again at something soon. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Bye-bye.